What would you do if your own daughter stood in front of 200 people and called you peasant stock? That's not just an insult. That's a dagger to the heart. My name is Robert Hayes, and this is the story of how betrayal inside my own family turned into a family drama that went viral, a revenge story people never saw coming, and a lesson in viral justice that started with silence and ended with a 2.6 Millers beach house changing lives forever. At my daughter Olivia's rehearsal dinner, the room was glowing with chandeliers, champagne glasses, clinking laughter, bouncing off the yacht club walls. And then in a voice louder than the jazz band, my only child looked me in the eye and said I was embarrassing peasant stock who didn't belong among real people like us. 200 heads turned toward me, the so-called outsider, at my own daughter's celebration. She didn't flinch. She didn't soften. She twisted the knife by saying I didn't belong in her world. Now here's the part that will confuse you, because I didn't shout back. I didn't storm out in rage. I simply set my glass down, looked at her once and walked away. Sovereign silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean weakness, but strategy. Because while Olivia smirked and the Langfords whispered about class and breeding, I was memorizing every single word, burning them into my chest like scars I would never forget. I had built everything she was standing on. From a $50 hot dog cart outside Fenway Park to 8 thriving restaurants across Massachusetts. From a boy abandoned in St. Mary's Children's Home with nothing but hope to a man who had built something real, something American, something earned. But in that glittering room, none of it mattered. All they saw was peasant stock. And that's where the seed of this betrayal grew. See, betrayal never comes from enemies. It always comes from the people who carry your last name. The people you raised, the ones you thought would stand by you when the world turned its back. The night Olivia humiliated me wasn't just a rehearsal dinner. It was a funeral for the bond between father and daughter. Still, I kept my mouth shut. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I wanted her to feel like she had won. Because when you're writing a family drama that doubles as a revenge story, the opening act isn't about rage, it's about patience. I knew if I stayed silent long enough, the truth would find me. And oh, it did. Because just 3 days later, the same daughter who banished me from her wedding for being too poor picked up the phone not to apologize, but to demand something far greater than forgiveness. She wanted my 2.6 Millers Cape Cod beach house. And that's when this viral justice story truly began. So before I tell you what I did next, before I reveal how I turned humiliation into redemption, betrayal into power, and silence into the loudest revenge you'll ever see, hit subscribe, because this isn't just a story. This is a warning, a father's cautionary tale, a truth about family money and betrayal that the world needs to hear. 3 days after Olivia's wedding, my phone rang. For a moment, I thought maybe she had come to her senses. Maybe she wanted to apologize for humiliating me in front of 200 people. But the second I heard her voice, I knew better. There was no warmth, no shame, no hint of regret. Just urgency, the kind of urgency that comes when someone wants something. Dad, we need to talk. Those 4 words have always been code in our family. She used the same tone when she wrecked her BMW at 17, when she maxed out her credit cards at 23, when she wanted me to clean up another mess. It was never about connection. It was always about rescue. I agreed to meet her at my South Shore restaurant, the same one she used to call embarrassingly middle class when she brought friends by in college. She arrived 20 minutes late wearing designer sunglasses, too big for her face, and twisting the diamond ring Edward had slipped on her finger, a ring I knew he couldn't afford. Behind the gloss, I saw the first cracks in her confidence. She slid into the booth across from me. Dad, I need to tell you something about Edward, about us. I didn't speak. I wanted her to fill the silence. She fidgeted with her cuticles, the same nervous habit she had as a little girl. Finally, the words spilled out. We're having some financial difficulties. Financial difficulties. Rich people never say they're broke. They say they have difficulties. She explained how Edward had poured money into cryptocurrency, into flashy startups, with buzzword names, into something called Virtue Signal Technologies that promised to revolutionize advertising. It turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. 320,000 in crypto, 410 in Virtue Signal. She whispered, eyes darting around the restaurant as if the walls might judge her. And then the credit cards. 17 of them, all maxed. I didn't react. I'd learned long ago that silence makes people reveal more than questions ever do. She looked at me searching for sympathy, but I gave her none. That's unfortunate, I said flatly. There's more, she said, her voice breaking. Edward's family isn't as wealthy as everyone thinks. It's mostly smoke and mirrors. They've been mortgaging properties for years to keep up appearances. I let that sink in. My daughter, who had once told me I wasn't good enough for her new family, had married into an empire built on lies. What about your trust fund? I asked. Her cheeks flushed. Gone. Edward convinced me to invest it. He said we'd double our money in 6 months. $400,000 gone like ash in the wind. I leaned back in the booth. So let me understand this. You married into old money that doesn't exist. You handed over every dime of your own inheritance, and now you're almost $1 million in debt. She nodded. And now you've come to me. Her eyes welled with tears. For a brief second, I thought she might finally apologize, finally acknowledge what she'd done. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice sharp. Dad, I need you to help us. We need your beach house. I blinked. My beach house? The one in Cape Cod. The $2.6 million property. You bought it last year, right? 4,000 square feet, oceanfront, perfect location. We need to sell it just temporarily to cover the debt. When things turn around, we'll buy it back from you. I stared at her. You want me to hand over my retirement home so you can sell it to pay off debts from choices I had no part in making? It's not giving, Dad. It's lending. Family helping family. She smiled weakly as if the words themselves would soften the absurdity. Family, I repeated. Where was family when you called me peasant stock? Where was family when you banned me from your wedding because I wasn't good enough for your new in-laws? Her smile collapsed. That was different. This is serious. We could lose everything. You don't understand the pressure Edward's under. If he files for bankruptcy, his family will disown him. His business connections will disappear. We'll be ruined. You'll have what I had at your age, I said quietly. Nothing. That's not the same. You had nothing to lose. I felt my jaw tighten. You're wrong. I had dignity. That's worth more than any beach house. Her eyes hardened. Dad, please. You owe me this. There it was. The entitlement that had been building for years finally spoken aloud. I owed her. After everything I had sacrificed, every hour I had worked, every check I had written, she thought I was the one in debt. What exactly do I owe you, Olivia? She swallowed. After all the sacrifices I made growing up with a working-class father. Do you know how humiliating it was to explain to my friends why my dad owned restaurants instead of companies? Why we lived in a normal house instead of an estate? Why I couldn't bring people over because you might embarrass me? Every word was a blade twisting deeper. She didn't see the father who had raised her. She saw a man who had failed her image of status. I looked at her, really looked at her. The girl I once tucked into bed was gone. In her place sat a stranger who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with legs. I'll think about it, I said finally. How long? She pressed. I'll call you. Dad, we don't have long. The creditors are already circling. I said I'll call you. She stood abruptly, gathering her designer purse, and walked out without saying goodbye, just as she had walked out of my life the day she decided I wasn't good enough. But this time, she had made one critical mistake. She had shown me exactly who she really was, and that meant it was time for me to show her who I had become. The next time I saw Olivia, she didn't come alone. She arrived with Edward Langford III, the man who had stood beside her at the altar, the man whose family looked down at me like I was gum stuck to the bottom of their polished Oxford shoes. They showed up at my office without warning Edward in a pressed navy suit, Olivia draped in silk that shimmered like money she didn't have. But their eyes betrayed them. Behind the designer armor, there was panic, the kind you can't hide even with smiles. Dad, Olivia said softly as she leaned in to hug me. It was the first time she had called me that in weeks. At her rehearsal dinner, she had called me peasant stock. At her wedding, she had erased me completely. Now she was hugging me like nothing had happened. Robert Edward added, extending his hand with that politician's grip, firm, warm, almost rehearsed. I know we didn't start off on the right foot, but family is family, right? I didn't shake his hand right away. I studied him. He had the smile of a man selling insurance policies he knew would never pay out. Finally, I shook because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let people think you believe them. We sat around the conference table. Edward placed his leather briefcase on the wood. Olivia clasped her manicured hands together, as if she were praying. They looked like a glossy magazine photo shoot of young power couple. Except I knew better. "Dad, we want to apologize," Olivia began. Her voice trembled, just enough to seem sincere. "We should never have asked you to stay away from the wedding. It was unfair. It was wrong. You've always been there for me." I waited. Silence is a scalpel. It cuts through the fat and gets to the bone. Edward leaned forward, picking up where Olivia left off. "She's right. We've been under a lot of pressure. Appearances matter in our world, but in the end, what matters most is family, and we need you now more than ever." There it was. Wrapped in velvet words was the iron fist of desperation. Olivia reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. "Dad, I know I've hurt you, but please believe me when I say Edward and I are just trying to survive. We love each other. We love this family, and we know we can overcome this storm with your help." Her eyes glistened, but I'd seen those tears before. As a child, she cried when she didn't get the toy she wanted. As a teenager, when she wanted a new car. As an adult, when she wanted another check to erase her mistakes. Tears had become her currency. Edward sighed dramatically, as though carrying the weight of the world. "Robert, I've been trying to hold it together. My family is pressuring me. Creditors are circling, but I believe in resilience. I believe in bouncing back. All we need is time and stability. Your Cape Cod property could give us that. Just a year, maybe less. Enough to restructure to secure new deals. We'd pay you back with interest." I nearly laughed. Interest? He wanted me to believe he was some bank offering a loan, but I kept my face blank because blank faces make liars dig deeper. "Think about it," Olivia whispered. "That house is beautiful, yes, but you could always buy another. You built an empire from nothing, Dad. That's who you are. For us, this house could mean survival. Without it, we could lose everything. Don't let us drown when you have the life raft right there." They were good, I'll give them that. Their script was tight, their performance polished. A united front of apologies and reassurances of false tenderness and borrowed humility. They wanted me to see them as victims of circumstance, not architects of their own ruin. But underneath the syrupy words, I heard the truth: panic, fear, entitlement. They weren't asking. They were demanding in disguise. I let Olivia hold my hand for a moment longer, then slowly pulled away. "I hear you," I said. Her face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. "So you'll help," I said. "I hear you," I repeated. Edward leaned in. "Robert, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking we're careless, that we're irresponsible. And maybe we've made mistakes. But who hasn't? You had nothing once, didn't you? You told that story 100 times. You built yourself up from nothing. Let us do the same. Just lend us the foundation to rebuild." For a second, he almost sounded human. Not entitled, not arrogant, just scared. But then he ruined it with the next sentence. "And besides," he added with a thin smile, "you can't take that beach house with you when you're gone. Wouldn't it be better to see it working for your family now?" There it was. The mask slipped. Underneath the performance, the disdain still burned. He was reminding me of my age, of my mortality, of how expendable he believed I was. I stood, pushing my chair back. "I'll think about it." I said the same words I'd given Olivia before. They both jumped on it like dogs chasing scraps. Olivia clapped her hands together softly, relief flooding her face. Edward exhaled as though he had just negotiated peace between nations. "Thank you, Dad," Olivia whispered, her voice sticky sweet. "You don't know what this means to us, but I did know. It meant that my silence was working. It meant they thought they had me cornered. They believed their counterfeit affection, their feigned apologies, their shallow appeals to family and legacy had cracked my armor. What they didn't know was that every fake smile, every false embrace, every rehearsed word of love was fuel. Fuel for the fire I was quietly building. Fuel for the day I would strike back, not with rage, not with shouting, but with something far louder: truth. And when that day came, there would be no velvet words, no designer suits, no staged apologies that could save them. Because betrayal dressed in silk is still betrayal, and family that loves you only when you're useful isn't family at all. That night after Olivia and Edward left my office, I couldn't sleep. Their words kept replaying in my head, sticky, sweet apologies, coded in desperation. They thought they had me fooled, thought their masks had covered the cracks. But instead of rage, what came flooding back to me were memories. Memories of a boy who had nothing. Memories of a boy I used to be. I was 8 years old when I first walked into St. Mary's Children's Home in Dorchester. My parents were gone, how I never fully understood because no one ever explained it to me. All I had were the clothes on my back and the gnawing sense that the world had decided I didn't matter. The building was old even then, bricks crumbling, pipes groaning every time the radiators tried to push heat into the dormitories. There were 46 of us kids abandoned, forgotten, shuffled around like paperwork. Breakfast was usually oatmeal so thin you could see the bottom of the bowl. Lunch, peanut butter sandwiches if we were lucky. Dinner depended on donations, sometimes canned beans, sometimes nothing. But what I remember most wasn't the hunger. It was the silence. That deep, heavy silence at night when the lights went out and you realized nobody was coming for you. Sister Margaret was the one who kept me alive. She'd sit by my bed when the nightmares came, her voice calm and steady, reminding me that I wasn't invisible, that I was worth something, even if the world didn't think so. She never had money to give, but she gave me something more, valuable belief. By the time I turned 16, I knew no one was going to rescue me. If I wanted out, I had to claw my way out. So I worked every job I could find: dishwasher, busboy, hauling crates at the docks. Every dollar I saved was a ticket away from being forgotten. When I was 22, I took the biggest gamble of my life. I bought a used food cart for $50 and set it up outside Fenway Park. I sold hot dogs and sodas to Red Sox fans. That first day, I made $37. $37 might not sound like much to some people, but to me it was proof that survival could become success. I thought I was rich. From that cart came a second one, then a third. By the time I was 30, I had opened my first brick-and-mortar diner. Greasy floors, checkered tablecloths, and a line out the door on Friday nights. People laughed when I said I wanted to build a chain. But while they laughed, I kept working. 16-hour days, 7 days a week. No vacations, no safety nets, just grit. 30 years later, I owned Harris Family Kitchen, 8 locations across Massachusetts, a brand people recognized. Last year alone, we cleared $2.1 million in profit, from $50 to millions. From an abandoned kid at St. Mary's to a man with an empire. And yet, as I sat in my office that night, staring at the ledgers, the photographs of each restaurant opening, the newspaper clippings that praised my rags to riches journey, I realized something. Somewhere along the way, I had taken all that hunger, all that desperation, and decided my daughter would. That night, long after Olivia and Edward left my office with their counterfeit smiles, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. Sleep never came easily when betrayal sat heavy on my chest. I kept hearing her voice, "Dad, you owe me this." The words scraped against my ribs like broken glass. For years, I had thought I was giving my daughter a better life. What I had really given her was entitlement, a belief that I existed to fix her mistakes. And now she wanted my most valuable possession, the one thing I had set aside for peace in my later years. I poured myself a cup of stale coffee and sat down at the old metal desk above the original Harris Family Kitchen location. That office wasn't pretty bare walls, a file cabinet that creaked a lamp with a cracked shade, but it was where every major decision of my life had been made. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to gather evidence. Because when you want to expose entitlement, you don't use anger, you use truth. I still had legal access to Olivia's financial accounts. When she turned 25 and received her trust fund, I'd set up systems to monitor until she reached 30. She had forgotten about that detail. So I logged in, and within minutes, the truth unfolded on the screen. They weren't struggling victims of bad luck. They were reckless aristocrats without an empire. 6 months before the wedding, they had spent more than $200,000 on luxury items. Olivia bought handbags that cost more than a year of rent for some of my employees, $15,000 each in colors to match her shoes. Edward had billed $8,000 dinners at Boston's most exclusive restaurants, hosting people he claimed were investors. They weren't. They were drinking buddies. Then there were weekend trips, Paris, Rome, Monte Carlo, $30,000 a pop each one, dressed up as networking. And then came the honeymoon. 12 nights in Venice at the Hotel Danieli, $3,000 a night plus private yacht tours and Michelin star meals. The total bill, $60,000. Most Americans never see that much money in their lifetime, and they had burned it in less than 2 weeks. I printed everything. Bank statements, credit card bills, investment reports, receipts. Page after page until the file was thick as a phone book. With every page, I felt the anger cooling into something sharper resolve. They wanted me to believe they were drowning. The truth was they had punched holes in their own lifeboat and expected me to patch it with my house. But I wasn't going to. No, I was going to do something louder, something permanent, something that couldn't be undone. I thought about the people who had truly mattered in my life, the ones who had lifted me when I had nothing. Sister Margaret came to mind. She had been at St. Mary's when I was a boy, the gentle voice who read us bedtime prayers when our parents were nowhere to be found, the steady hands who reminded us that kindness existed even in scarcity. So I picked up the phone. When her voice answered warm and familiar despite the decades, I felt like that 8-year-old boy again. "Robert Hayes," she said with surprise. "It's been too long." "Yes, sister, far too long." We exchanged pleasantries, but I got straight to the point. "What would make the biggest difference for the children right now?" She hesitated, then admitted. "A new building. The roof leaks when it rains. The heating system is failing. The walls are too thin. We'd need at least $2 million, maybe more. But that's only a dream." I looked at the folder of my daughter's waste spread across the desk. $2 million less than the Cape Cod house was worth. I made the decision in that moment. What if I told you that dream was about to come true? Her silence said more than words. Finally, she whispered, "Robert, are you serious?" "Dead serious. But I want to make it public. Cameras witnesses everything. Not for recognition, for impact. I want the world to see what real values look like." After I hung up, I called Richard Lee, my attorney. Richard had been with me through business acquisitions, leases, franchise deals. He knew me as practical, sometimes even cautious. He had never heard me like this. "You want to do what he asked. Donate my Cape Cod property irrevocably to St. Mary's. Draw up the papers notarized. I want it binding the moment I sign." "Robert, that's your retirement home. Your biggest single asset." "I know, which is why I'm doing it. I want to trade bricks for lives. I want to teach my daughter what real wealth means." Richard was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "If you're sure, I'll prepare everything. But once you sign, there's no going back." "That's the point," I said. "I don't want to go back." When I ended the call, I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the street where I once sold hot dogs for 50 cents apiece. Back then, I had nothing but grit and hunger. Now I had a choice. I could enable my daughter one more time, or I could build a future for children who truly knew what it meant to have nothing. By midnight, the plan was in motion. The evidence was stacked. The donation was prepared. The news cameras were on standby. Olivia thought she was manipulating me into saving her, but what she didn't realize was that her betrayal had unlocked the sharpest weapon I had ever carried: clarity. And with clarity comes power. The day of reckoning arrived with the kind of crisp New England afternoon sky that felt almost too clear, too calm for what was about to unfold. At 1:30 sharp, Richard Lee walked into my office, his leather briefcase stuffed with documents, 3 copies of the donation contract, each notarized, each irreversible. "Once you sign, Robert," he reminded me, "there's no undoing it." "That's the point," I said. At 2 o'clock, the Channel 7 crew arrived. Janet Morrison, the reporter, was sharp as ever, suit, pressed microphone ready. "Mr. Hayes, is this going to be as substantial as you hinted?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Substantial enough to change lives," I told her. "Keep your cameras rolling." 15 minutes later, the door opened again. Sister Margaret stepped inside, her habit neat, her face glowing with nervous anticipation. She carried a folder of photographs, smiling children at St. Mary's, cramped dormitories, the leaky roof. She looked at me, eyes moist. "Are you sure you want to do this publicly?" "I'm sure," I said. "The world needs to see the difference between real values and empty words." At 2:25, my phone buzzed. A text from Olivia, running a little late. "Edward had to stop at the bank." Perfect. Let them believe this was a financial negotiation. At 2:30 on the dot, they walked in. Olivia, her hair styled to perfection, though the exhaustion clung to her eyes. Edward, posture, stiff jaw, tight, trying to mask his nerves with arrogance. The moment they spotted the cameras, both froze. Dad, what's going on? Olivia asked, her smile faltering. Sit down, I said evenly. Both of you. They sat across from me in the very chairs where I'd once fired employees for stealing and closed million-dollar deals with franchise partners. I gestured to the others. This is Sister Margaret from St. Mary's, and this is Janet Morrison from Channel 7 News. Edward's face flushed. Robert, why are reporters here to witness the truth? I said. Janet lifted her camera. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Hayes. I stood behind my desk, the file of Olivia and Edward's spending laid neatly to the side. My voice was steady. 3 days ago, my daughter and her husband asked me to hand over my Cape Cod beach house, valued at $2. $6 million so they could sell it to cover debts from investments I had no part in making. They told me I owed them. Today I'm here to say they were right about one thing. I do owe something, but not to them. Olivia stiffened. Dad, this isn't what we discussed. Silence, I said firmly. I owe something to the children who are growing up the way I did, alone, with nothing, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love them. Children like the ones at St. Mary's. Sister Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears. Janet's camera light glowed red. I picked up the first document and signed my name in bold ink. Today I am donating my Cape Cod home to St. Mary's Children's Home. Effective immediately, ownership transfers to them. Permanently. Edward shot to his feet, his mask cracking. What the hell are you doing? That was our house. I looked straight into the camera. You hear that? He just called my house theirs. Janet raised her brows, catching every second. Olivia leaned forward, panic streaking her face. Dad, stop. You can't do this. Call your lawyer, reverse it. Please. I glanced at Richard, who stood silently in the corner. Richard, can this be undone? Not a chance, Richard said flatly. It's irrevocable. Irrevocable? I repeated, savoring the word. Even if I wanted to, which I don't. That's when Edward's temper snapped. Nobody cares about your damn orphans, he shouted, his voice echoing across the office. The room froze. Sister Margaret recoiled, horror etched across her face. Janet's camera captured every syllable. Olivia turned toward her husband in shock. Edward, what did you just say? He realized his mistake instantly, but the damage was done. I leaned across the desk, my voice calm. For the first time since I've known you, Edward, you just spoke honestly. I signed the second copy of the contract. Ink scratched against paper like thunder. Olivia burst into tears. Dad, you're destroying us. Am I asked, or am I teaching you what lives are truly worth? Sister Margaret stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. This donation will change everything. 47 children will have safe beds, warm classrooms, hope for the future. But Olivia wasn't listening. Her tears turned to rage. We don't care about those kids, we care about us. Janet's camera zoomed closer. The nation would hear those words by evening. I picked up the final contract, pausing for just a moment. Olivia, I said, locking eyes with her, do you remember calling me peasant stock? You were right. Peasants build. They feed. They create. They give more than they take. I'm proud to be peasant stock. And with that, I signed the third document. The room fell silent except for the steady hum of the camera. I handed all 3 copies to Sister Margaret. Take care of them the way you once took care of me. She clutched the papers to her chest. Robert, you've given them a future. Olivia slumped in her chair, her makeup streaking Edward, pacing like a caged animal. I'll never forgive you, she hissed. I know, I said quietly. But maybe someday you'll thank me. And with that, the truth was sealed, not just on paper, but in the eyes of everyone watching. That same evening, I sat in the corner booth of my South Shore restaurant, sipping coffee that had long gone cold when every television in the place flipped to Channel 7 News. Janet Morrison's report filled the room. Local businessman Robert Hayes donates $2.6 million Cape Cod property to St. Mary's Children's Home, live on camera in front of his daughter and son-in-law, who had asked for the house to pay off massive debts. The footage rolled. Edward, red-faced, screaming, "That was our house," Olivia sobbing. "We don't care about those kids," and the moment that sealed their fate, Edward's voice booming through the speakers, "Nobody cares about your damn orphans." The restaurant went dead quiet. Every server froze mid-step. Customers stared at the screens, forks suspended in midair. Then slowly applause began. An elderly woman at table 12 clapped first, then the couple beside her until the entire dining room erupted. My staff cheered. "That's our boss. That's Mr. Hayes." My name echoed through the restaurant louder than any advertisement I'd ever paid for. My phone buzzed nonstop. Texts poured in. "You're a hero. About time someone stood up to entitled brats. Those kids are lucky to have you." But not every message was kind. One from my ex-wife, Linda. "How could you humiliate our daughter like that, family first, Robert? Always." Another from my niece, Jennifer. "You'll regret this. Blood is blood." And then a final one unsigned, but I knew who it was, from Edward. "You destroyed us. This isn't over." I deleted it without hesitation. By morning, the story had gone viral. Social media lit up with hashtags Chuck Peasant Stock Pride, Shachur's Real Family, Josh's Viral Justice. Clips of Edward's outburst and Olivia's words spread like wildfire. Millions watched them unravel in real time. Headlines screamed, "Father chooses orphans over entitled daughter." "Businessman donates 2.6 million. Home exposes greedy in-laws." The backlash was brutal. Edward's so-called consulting firm collapsed overnight. Potential clients vanished, unwilling to be associated with a man who mocked orphan children on live television. His Harvard classmates distanced themselves, his LinkedIn page flooded with angry comments, his future empire reduced to ashes in less than 24 hours. Olivia didn't fare better. The same society circles she had fought so hard to enter turned their backs on her. Former friends whispered behind her back, replaying her words. We don't care about those kids, until she became a walking scandal. Invitations disappeared. Prestigious doors slammed shut. Her perfect image shattered. Meanwhile, St. Mary's Children's Home became the center of a miracle. Sister Margaret called me the next morning, her voice trembling with joy. Robert, you won't believe this. The phones haven't stopped ringing since last night. We've received over $40,000 in donations in 12 hours. By the end of the week, that number had exploded. Construction companies offered free labor. Furniture stores pledged beds and desks. Tech firms promised computers for the new classrooms. Churches held fundraisers. Strangers mailed checks with handwritten notes for the kids. Because they deserved better. One letter stood out, a crayon drawing of a house with children smiling inside. Underneath, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," from Daniel, age 8. I pinned it to my office wall right above the folder of Olivia and Edward's debts. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. One represented greed, the other gratitude. But not everyone saw it that way. Linda called again, furious. You think you're a hero? You humiliated your daughter on television. No, I told her calmly. I revealed the truth she gave me. I didn't put those words in her mouth. She's your daughter, Linda screamed. And I'm her father, I said. A father who finally stopped enabling. She hung up, leaving nothing but silence on the line. Days passed and the storm only grew. National outlets picked up the story. Good Morning America called. PBS asked for a documentary feature. Commentators debated on talk shows about entitlement, family loyalty, and tough love. Everywhere I turned, people wanted to shake my hand, thank me, or share their own stories of children who had taken advantage of them. As for Olivia, the cracks widened. A week after the broadcast, she showed up outside one of my restaurant's sunglasses, hiding swollen eyes. She didn't come in. She just stood across the street watching, then turned and walked away. It was the first sign that the weight of her choices had begun to crush her. Edward wasn't so quiet. He filed a lawsuit claiming I had promised the house to them. Richard Lee crushed it in court within hours. The signed contracts with St. Mary's were ironclad. Edward stormed out of the courthouse, shouting at reporters, further destroying what little reputation he had left. I should have felt vindicated, and in many ways I did. But sitting alone in my office at night, I also felt the ache of loss. Because while the world applauded me, my daughter was unraveling, and no amount of donations or headlines could fill that void. Still, I reminded myself of one truth sometimes. The only way to help someone is to stop helping them. Olivia had to fall, Edward had to burn, and out of their ashes, maybe something honest could grow. 6 months passed, though some days it felt like 6 years. The media storm eventually faded, the headlines moved on, and the world found new scandals to chew on. But for St. Mary's, the story was just beginning. My $2.6 million beach house had been sold, the funds put to work, faster than I thought possible. The new building rose on the edge of Dorchester like a monument to second chances, 3 stories of red brick, and glass with a playground out front that shone in the morning sun. On dedication day, I stood beside Sister Margaret as children ran through the hallways, their laughter echoing off freshly painted walls. The new facility held 75 individual bedrooms, a library stocked with 10,000 books, a computer lab humming with 30 brand new machines. For the first time in decades, St. Mary's looked less like a shelter and more like a home. As I walked past the rooms, I paused at one with a hand-drawn sign taped to the door, Room 14 Daniel. Inside sat a small boy, no older than 8, scribbling furiously in a notebook. When he saw me, his eyes widened. "Mr. Hayes," he said, leaping up from the desk. "I'm writing thank you letters. One for every person who donated." "How many so far?" I asked. 47, he said proudly. "One for each kid who was here when you gave us the house." I felt something tighten in my chest. That boy with his shaky handwriting and big dreams understood gratitude better than my own daughter ever had. He didn't see me as a wallet with legs. He saw me as a person who had given him hope. I bent down and asked him, "And what do you want to be when you grow up, Daniel?" He grinned. "I want to help kids like me. Maybe run a place like this someday." I smiled, ruffling his hair. "I think you'd be good at that." As we walked back toward the lobby, Sister Margaret pressed an envelope into my hand. "This came for you yesterday. I think you should read it in private." The handwriting on the front stopped me cold. It was Olivia's. I slipped it open. Inside was a single-page letter and a check for $5,000 made out to St. Mary's Children's Home. The letter read, "Dad, it's been 6 months since the day you signed away the house. 6 months since my world collapsed. Edward and I divorced 3 months ago. I couldn't stay married to a man who cared more about appearances than about people. I'm living in a studio apartment now, working as a server at a restaurant downtown. It's hard, but for the first time, I feel like I'm learning what real work feels like. The $5 I'm sending isn't much, but it's mine. Earned with my own hands. I hope one day you'll be proud of me again. Love, Olivia." I read it 3 times, the words blurring. It wasn't a full apology, not yet, but it was a beginning. That evening, I tucked the letter into my wallet next to Daniel's crayon drawing of a house. 2 voices, one from a boy with nothing, one from a daughter who had nearly lost everything. Both reaching for hope, both trying to build something new. The truth was, I didn't know if I was ready to see Olivia. Not yet. The wound was still raw, the humiliation still burned when I thought of that night at the rehearsal dinner, her words echoing across the room, "peasant stock." But I also knew this change rarely comes in a flash. It comes in steps, in small sacrifices, in hard work and humility. And for Olivia, this letter was her first real step. Sister Margaret asked gently, "Will you see her?" "When she's ready," I said. "How will you know when she stops asking for things and starts giving them?" That night as I left St. Mary's, I stopped to watch the children playing outside on the brand new playground. Swings creaked, laughter filled the air, and the setting sun cast a golden glow across the courtyard. I thought about the boy I once was sleeping on a thin mattress in a drafty dormitory, never imagining that one day I'd be the man providing safety for others. I thought about my daughter alone in a small apartment, perhaps sitting at her own table, wondering how to rebuild from the rubble of her choices. And I realized something: reconciliation doesn't always happen face to face. Sometimes it begins with a letter, a donation, a single honest admission of effort. Sometimes forgiveness starts quietly, like a seed planted in the dark. I didn't know if Olivia and I would ever fully heal, but for the first time in years, I believed it was possible. Because she had finally done the one thing I had waited for all her life. She had given, not taken. I stood at the edge of the playground as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and purple. The children at St. Mary's were everywhere on swings, climbing the jungle gym, chasing each other across the fresh green grass. Their laughter rose like music, a chorus that drowned out every bitter word I'd heard in that rehearsal dinner hall. For a moment, I just closed my eyes and let it wash over me. This was what mattered. Not chandeliers and yacht clubs, not designer gowns or family names printed on embossed invitations, not the fragile pride of people who measured worth by bank accounts and country clubs. No, this was wealth, joy, safety, hope. I thought about Daniel, that 8-year-old boy with shaky handwriting and a heart bigger than his small frame. I thought about Olivia's letter, $5,000 she had earned Not through inheritance, not through manipulation, but through work. Two children from two different worlds, both reminding me of the same truth. Family is not about blood. Family is about character. And then the words that had burned inside me for months finally felt free. Blood doesn't make you, family character does. The only wealth that matters is what you give away. I had given away a house, but what I received in return could never be measured in dollars. I received peace. I received purpose. And maybe, just maybe, I received the first fragile steps toward reconciliation with my daughter. As the last rays of light faded, I realized something else. This wasn't just my story, it was a mirror. Because out there, someone is watching who feels used, unappreciated, treated like a bank instead of a person. Someone who has given and given only to be told it's never enough. And maybe that someone is you. If you've ever felt that sting, if you've ever wondered when to stop enabling and start living for yourself, then this story is your sign. Your silence can be powerful. Your boundaries can be love. And your greatest wealth may be what you choose to give away. So now I want to hear from you. What does real family mean to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Save this story if it struck something inside you, because you might need to hear it again when doubt creeps back in. And if you want more true stories that cut to the bone and heal at the same time, subscribe right now, because the next one might just change the way you see everything.